Marie Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette.
In life,
Headed to death.
I paid the price.
I paid the price.
A minor price.
I was jailed. Yours was a minor price.
I was exiled.
Years abroad, painting portraits of the crowned heads of Europe, with the prices for them paid to you. I was imprisoned.
A few months here and there in the delightful Palais de Luxembourg. I had visited there with my mother as a child when it was a museum. Some wonderful masterpieces of Rubens. You must have felt right at home with free use of canvas and paint, even painting a portrait of your jailer. How fearsome he must have been! Oh, such a fine-looking gentleman.
A citizen, not a gentleman.
And now you're what? A Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, Napoleon's little darling of the art world, just as you were Robespierre's.
As you were the little darling of Marie Antoinette.
She was my friend,
Your monarch.
my monarch and my friend. I met her first in the gardens of Marly-le-Roi, beside the magnificent palace. Jasmine and honeysuckle overhanging the walks, a waterfall, carpets of green, flowers, fountains, one of which spouted up so high that it was lost from sight. Oh, it was all grand, all regal. One morning I encountered Queen Marie Antoinette walking in the park, and several of the ladies of her court. They were all in white dresses, and so young and pretty that for a moment I thought I was in a dream. I was with my mother, and was turning away when the Queen was kind enough to stop me, and invited me to continue in any direction I might prefer.
The direction of unswerving loyalty to a royal family unconnected to the reality of the nation it ruled. But Marly-le-Roi has encountered reality. Have you visited those grounds since?
Since your beloved revolution? Yes, 3 years ago when I returned to France. A failing thread factory now. Grounds overgrown, sculptures removed to the Place de la Concorde. All that beauty disposed of.
Beauty, by its very nature, is disposable.
Or evanescent, perhaps, not lasting forever, except in our paintings.
And what does not last forever has been disposed of, if not by the hand of man, by time itself. Beauty is disposable. Truth is eternal.
The truth of Robespierre, the true equality of all mankind, except, of course, those who might disagree with those who have power, sounds very much like autocracy to me, if not absolute monarchy, minus the titles.
Robespierre paid for his overreach.
And how did you escape his fate, the guillotine? You were his ally, if not his lackey. You signed death warrants by the score.
I was taken ill. It was at the evening session of the National Convention that Robespierre was sentenced. I didn't attend.
Or saved by a tummy ache. How heroic! You had promised at Robespierre's arrest that if you drink hemlock, I shall drink it with you. Could you not find hemlock and had to make do with sour grapes?
Your sour grapes said perhaps the success of my Death of Socrates, so widely admired even by Thomas Jefferson, now president, who was minister to France from the United States of America when it was shown. He called it superb, the best of the salon, better than your little mother and daughter self-portrait. But you were never much for classical subjects, just a portrait painter of the Ancien Régime.
Oh, you have painted portraits too. Oh, such a lovely depiction of Lavoisier and his wife. Oh, 1788, wasn't it? Just before the revolution. Such a nice idea to add in those scientific instruments and take away Madame Lavoisier's big hat. Makes them seem less like the wealthy tax collectors they were and more like serious scientists.
They were serious. The discovery and naming of oxygen and hydrogen, groundbreaking.
Oh, but combine oxygen and hydrogen, and you produce an explosion, much like the reactions to Lavoisier's actions as commissioner of the Royal Gunpowder Administration. So unpopular, so incendiary. No wonder your painting was removed from the Paris Salon of 1789 for fear of sparking controversy.
I still had two paintings displayed. The lictors bring to Brutus the bodies of his sons, a Roman consul who ordered the deaths of his traitorous sons to save the Republic. Service to country above love of family. Patriotism. A commission, was it not? A government commission? Yes. Regretted by the government, I'm sure, as your brand of rabid patriotism took hold of the populace. And my second, the loves of Paris and Helen. Another commission? From the brother of the king? On the cusp of revolution, with your livelihood depending on the existing order, why support the revolution? I quote Rousseau: "The fruits of the earth belong to us all, and the earth itself to nobody. The social contract demands that power remain in the hands of the people and not of the few." Add to that your ardent artistic sensibility, your volatile temperament, and your fierce brand of republican independence. Idealism, if you will, like your idealistic representations of mythology and ancient history. The idealistic has so much more meaning than the quotidian. What was your entry in the salon? Ah, yes, a portrait. Hubert Robert, fellow artist, unremarkable, quotidian, true to life, real, not merely the fabric of imagination. Imagination has potential far beyond anything bound to day reality, a potential for good or potential for harm. One might argue that the ideals imagined by your precious revolution caused great destruction. But you've recovered from that, haven't you? Transitioning smoothly from revolution to republic to Napoleon, gaining commissions all along the way. Ideals and imagination, is it? Or day-to-day business with anyone willing to pay? We don't see eye to eye. We never will. But we needn't bad mouth one another. I remember at the Salon of 1791, where you and I both displayed portraits. I commented to my students that people might well think that my portrait of the Countess of Sorcy was painted by a woman, and that your portrait of the composer Paisiello was painted by a man. Oh, no need to badmouth yourself by complimenting me, but let's get back to your portrait of Madame Lavoisier. That hair, that style of dress, what do they remind me of? Oh, yes. Cascading hair, simple unstructured muslin dress. If you had kept a large hat on Madame Lavoisier's head, people would almost believe you are copying my portrait of Queen Marie Antoinette, shown at the Salon de Paris a few years earlier, 1783. Oh, such hats had gone out of style by 1789. Oh, then you admit you are copying my portrait? Of course not. Portrait caused quite a stir at the time. A queen in such informal attire, and made of cotton, not the finest Lyonnaise silk, hardly regal, but it became the fashion, did it not? The chemise à la reine. As I recall, that painting was removed from the Salon of 1783 because of the controversy. It was. We've each had our time at the center of artistic maelstroms, like the brouhaha I caused at the Salon in 1787 with the self-portrait I made with my daughter. Same year as my death of Socrates. But the controversy was about my self-portrait. Imagine an artist showing her teeth in a smile. It was considered an affectation contrary to the classic style that follows the examples of the ancients. But the world was changing or about to change. We both have had a hand in changing the world, or at least France. Your portraits of Marie Antoinette, for example. Such opulence, of such style, such extravagance, people barely able to afford a crust of bread, and Marie Antoinette posing in gown after gown, brandishing her royal wealth like a weapon poised at the throat of the people. But I showed her simplicity too. And after the affair of the diamond necklace, you try to rehabilitate her image, portraying her as a doting mother. She seems to me to be stiff and unfeeling, just a broodmare for the royal lineage, with an empty cradle signifying the recent loss of her little Sophie Beatrice. No sumptuous jewelry. A mother, that's what she was, a good mother. spoiling her offspring with expensive playthings, I'm sure,
or teaching them manners. I once saw her make her 6-year-old daughter dine with a little peasant girl. The queen saw to it that the little visitor was served first. Courtesy and generosity, that was Marie Antoinette.
feeding one peasant girl while thousands went starving.
The queen had that painting installed at Versailles, where she would pass it before and after mass. Yet when the Dauphin died early in 1789, she told me she had it removed. Seeing his smiling face brought tears to her eyes, and she could not bear the sadness.
Lucky for the painting.
What do you mean?
Do you think it would have survived when Versailles was ransacked? Even her bed was torn to shreds. They would have stabbed every figure in that painting as effigies of the hated royal family.
Well, the painting is back in Versailles now.
Hung facing the wall and forbidden to the public, although I believe that Emperor Napoleon has ordered it to be removed.
I visited. The custodian recognized me from Rome and welcomed me. He turned it around, and after I had admired it, I offered him a small gratuity. He declined, saying many others had already given him gratuities for seeing the work, and he judged that I, as the artist, had already earned him enough money.
A pleasant anecdote, one of many to add to your memoirs.
I would rather write a memoir than the aphorisms you've come up with. A true artist always trembles before struggling with nature. What do you know of nature? What landscape paintings have you done?
The view from my room, imprisoned in the Palais de Luxembourg.
Imprisoned with paint and palette, hardly a view of squalor out your window. But you haven't travelled much, have you? Not the opportunities I've had to view the landscapes across Europe during my exile.
Pastels, yes.
Is so much quicker than oils, a visual journal, if you will, of the lands I've travelled across.
I traveled to Italy in my youth. I made many landscape sketches there.
Not exhibited.
No, although through the years I've used my Italian sketches as the basis for future work.
Your methodology, sketches upon sketches until you have your composition set in stone, so to speak.
Yes, shuffled, jumbled, revised for the utmost clarity. Everything is calculated in my paintings. Changing one figure can lead to a cascading series of adjustments. Penciling, resketching, gray wash, chalk outlines on drapery. I plan meticulously. But not all plans come to fruition. The oath of the tennis court, for instance.
That's a sketch, not a painting.
A pen and ink, wash, chalk, but it was exhibited at the Salon de Paris in 1791.
During my exile, but I remember you being commissioned to paint it by the Jacobins, was it not?
Not yet the Jacobins, the Society of Friends of the Constitution. I felt it my obligation to preserve the history of the remarkable revolutionary patriotism being shown by so many.
Such a tumultuous time, too overwhelming to pay attention to every detail.
A schism in the Estates General over proposed reforms to the monarchy. Locked out of the meeting hall by the nobility and clergy, the Third Estate met on a tennis court as the newly formed National Assembly, vowing to create a national constitution, one built upon solid, unassailable foundations.
And your sketch memorializes that occasion.
It was meant to be epic in scale, life-size figures in the foreground, portraits taken from life of all the major participants.
Portraits of many who would soon meet their fate at the guillotine.
Yes, by 1791 the Jacobins were in conflict with the more conservative founders of the National Assembly. It would have been political and artistic suicide to complete the painting I envisioned.
Well, not the form of suicide you'd choose.
Are you implying something?
Weren't you released from custody in one of your short imprisonments for fear that you might commit suicide? I'm sure I've heard that bruited about.
I can't say why I was released.
No, you can speculate. Many others have, especially considering your infamous hunger strike.
Well, that was years ago. I was little more than a child.
Petulant child refusing to eat after your second failure to win the Prix de Rome.
How long did you go without food before the faculty of the academy encouraged you to go on living and continuing with your artwork? 2.5 days. Your first failed suicide, just like your failures to win the Prix de Rome. The first try, Minerva fighting Mars. Very dramatic. A second failure, Diana and Apollo killing Niobe's children. Practically the same composition. In a rut, were we? My teachers appreciated the Rococo style, though not enough to reward me the prize at its years-long sojourn in Rome for study. The Rococo style you've ridiculed me for. Your third failure, the death of Seneca. A little more classical in nature, but didn't this lose to a painting on the very same subject by Pierre Péron? Even more classical than yours, and the subject matter suicide, fitting following your hunger strike. My fourth entry one, Erostratus discovering the cause of Antiochus's disease. Not my choice of subject, it was assigned from the story in Plutarch's Lives. Your style was changing. Even more so after 5 years in Italy, filling notebook after notebook with sketches from Poussin, Caravaggio, and Raphael, performing rigorous examination of classical culture and its eternal conceptual power, the forms of ancient art. When visiting the ruins of Herculaneum and Pompeii and viewing those ancient Roman vases and columns, I felt as if cataracts clouding my vision had been surgically removed. Oh, have you been to Pompeii? I visited Naples in 1790 and loved the scenery. The Isle of Ischia, if I had to choose one place to spend all my life, it might be there. But my time in Naples was very busy. I had planned to stay only 6 weeks, but with so many commissions for portraits, my stay extended to 6 months. It was in Naples that I painted one of my favorite portraits, Lady Hamilton as the Persian Sibyl. Such an interesting person, from the lowest classes to the wife of the English ambassador to Naples, to the mistress of that seafaring troublemaker, Horatio Nelson. Oh, she had a face as mercurial as the weather. Her eyes twinkling, her hair flying, she showed you a bewitching bacchante. Then, all of a sudden, her face expressed grief, and you saw a magnificent, repentant Mary Magdalene. She could go on to show an infinity of attitudes, each pose transforming her from one character to another, enough to fill a whole book of images. Which Friedrich Rehberg actually did, drawings faithfully copied from nature at Naples. I carried my Sibyl with me throughout Europe, where it was universally admired. Venice, Vienna, Dresden, St. Petersburg. I even shipped a version for display in the Paris Salon of 1798. I remember. More recently, Bonaparte's brothers have come to see it and have said the most flattering things. Most interesting, but I merely asked if you had been to the ruins of Pompeii. Oh, I had little time in Naples for anything aside from painting, or other than arranging for the education of my daughter. She was about 10 at the time. A little older than my children. You have four, right? Yes, two boys and twin girls, all adults now. My Laure Amélie Félicité just married Colonel Meunier this past March. Her sister won't be long after in going to the altar, I'm sure. A colonel in Emperor Napoleon's army? Yes, receiving the Officer's Cross of the Legion of Honor last year. He's headed places. Clever, aligning yourself ever more closely with the Emperor, as long as Bonaparte remains in power. His conquests give no sign of faltering. Your daughter's name, is it a tribute to Émilie Chalgrin? You are being cruel. Cruel? Giving your approval to her conviction was cruel. Letting her be guillotined 3 days before her daughter's wedding, that was cruel. She was caught with stolen goods. A candle worth £20. She consorted with thieves. She roomed with a woman who had business with a dealer in second-hand goods and probably had no idea that some of the goods bore the royal mark. So much looting had gone on. Two women on their own. They had to live somehow. Live honestly or do not live at all.
Oh, that is the height of cruelty. Emily Chalgrin was a fellow artist. Her brother pleaded with you to save her. Is your heart so hard? She was a woman alone. Her husband had abandoned her.
As you abandoned your husband, it is your turn to be cruel at a personal level. You left him, fled France. My life in Paris had become untenable. Rumors circulating from all sides, hoodlums throwing sulphur into our cellars, palpable danger in the air. A group of drunk National Guardsmen burst in one night and forbid me from departing when I had my carriage and passport at the ready. I tried to make the argument that since liberty was the catchphrase of the day, I intended to make use of mine. Oh, they left me trembling with fear. Well, two later returned, abashed, stating that they were neighbors and advised me to leave by stagecoach rather than by my carriage to garner less attention. I did so, although it took a fortnight for me to secure a reservation. I left France to save my life. Oh, I distinctly remember your husband giving as a reason that you were heading to Italy to instruct and improve yourself. Clever to leave France before all your wealth was confiscated. What wealth? My husband had already squandered everything we had. I was handling up to 3 sittings in a day and taking on pupils at his insistence. He collected all the money. I never saw any. He invested it. He lost it. I had no more than 80 louis in my pocket when I left for Italy. Yeah, but you must have earned over 1 million by that time. I had, past tense. Well, you more than made up for it on your travels abroad, I'm sure. I am not as wealthy as many assume. When my daughter married, I was approached for a dowry that far exceeded anything I could lay my hands on. Your Napoleon had just invaded Italy, and my holdings in the Bank of Venice had vanished overnight. I paid what dowry I could with the proceeds coming from the many portraits I painted in St. Petersburg. Your daughter married in Russia, did she not? Gaetan Nigri, associated with the Imperial Theatres of St. Petersburg, a man without talents, without fortune, without a name. And you were not pleased, I take it. My daughter can be headstrong. She stayed in Russia while I continued my travels, arriving back in Paris soon before I made my own return. Her husband had been engaged to provide French musicians for the theaters in St. Petersburg. A nice change from the bizarre Russian bands in which the musicians play only one individual note each on their horns, somehow resulting in a coherent melody. Has your daughter returned to Russia? No, her husband left by himself a few months later. It was never a happy marriage, I'm sorry to say. A fortnight sufficed for love to evaporate and obligation to remain. I hope your daughter's marriage is more successful. Not all marriages end in divorce. Some even survive it. You're talking of yourself, aren't you? As you know, the revolution took a great toll on many marriages. With my French citizenship revoked after I left in exile, my husband had no choice but to divorce me in order to remain in France and retain our joint property. But with the rise of Napoleon, he did petition to have my name removed from the list of counter-revolutionary émigrés, which allowed you to return to France. Yes, after 12 years apart. Not quite a marriage surviving divorce. Whereas yours did. I hardly blame your wife for divorcing you after you voted to condemn the king to death. I do not understand, however, why she would take you back and formally remarry you just 2 years later. I had been imprisoned. Oh, so she saved you from suicide by sulking. As I recall, you have said, there is no game of chance more hazardous than marriage. Well, sometimes you lose a role only to win it all back later. More likely an amicable stalemate than a happily ever after ending. Art supersedes love for both of us, I am sure. Which accounts for the great jealousy of others for our talents. But it is not only your humble, talented portraiture that has brought you acclaim. Your looks, your ease, your social graces, your musical gifts, your skill at conversation, none of which you possess. True, I do not have your gift of witty banter. Even at my trial, I bumbled and mumbled in my defense. I'm not a skilled orator. Ask anyone.
Oh, I needn't bother. Every word you utter proves your point.
Touché.
You are somewhat justified in your analysis of my success, my initial success. I was the object of many attentions, and some men booked commissions hoping to get into my good graces. But their attempts at seduction always failed. I was so absorbed in my art that nothing could take me away from it.
I recall rumors that you, as a pretty young, amiable woman, could not possibly be painting her own pictures, and must have had an amorous form of patronage to be allowed into the Academy, especially since your husband, being an art dealer, should have prevented your entry.
You too have benefited from non-amorous patronage.
Uh, Who could love my face but my wife? You, on the other hand, were full of beauty and charm in your day.
But as you have stated, beauty is disposable. Age takes care of that.
Age leaves its mark on us, yet we've both left our mark on the world.
Oh, the obelisks you directed to be erected in the provinces in praise of the Revolution, the commemorative medallions you had struck, the grand festivals and funerals you arranged to honor the heroes of the Revolution? Ephemera.
True. Even the way actors began arranging themselves on stage to resemble the poses in my paintings, the fad has already passed.
Well, what is my legacy? A record of the visages of European royalty?
The money from those portraits you will pass on to your daughter.
For one portrait shortly before the Revolution, I was reportedly paid a quantity of sweetmeats wrapped in banknotes in a sum large enough to ruin the treasury. In reality, I had been presented 4,000 francs in a box worth 20 louis. For a similar sitting around the same time, I had received 8,000 francs. But money doesn't mean much to me. I live very simply. Plain muslin dress, a muslin cap. When arriving in St. Petersburg, that was my traveling costume. I had barely had a short rest before I was informed that I was about to be presented to Empress Catherine of all Russia. There was no time to have a suitable gown made, so it was muslin for me as I was led into court. The Empress was surprisingly short and stout, but a lovely person. She made no mention of my dress. We had a long and very cordial conversation, but I was so awed by her that I forgot to kiss her hand, which the ambassador had clearly instructed me I must do, and for which the Empress had clearly removed her glove. I never did kiss her hand. On the day before I was to start painting her portrait, she died. As she lay in state, the ladies watching over her body would bend to kiss her soft, beautiful hand, but I did not dare, nor did I dare look at her waxen face. I did not wish to spoil the memory of it in life.
More peaceful an end than that of your Queen Marie Antoinette.
But followed by events that I'm sure bore a strong resemblance to the events France had experienced a few years earlier.
The assassination of Tsar Paul, you mean?
At his ascension to the throne, the entire tenor of society changed. The Tsar was full of whims and grudges. He forbade the wearing of round hats, required the wearing of powder, which I detest. The most minor transgressions would lead to exile in Siberia. The nation was walking on eggshells, spies all around. He delighted in humbling the nobility. As long as Paul's reign lasted, terror was the order of the day.
You are likening it to France and the Reign of Terror.
With great reason. But you did not just snub and humble the nobility of France, you executed them. You executed anyone whom your spies cast aspersions on.
We were reforming society. One must demolish in order to then reform.
Oh, you proclaim idealism and republicanism, but in reality, life then was dealing with societal changes little different from changes decreed by the whims of a deranged monarch.
Like Louis XVI. No, you portray the French monarchy as a corrupt institution, perhaps true to some extent, but not due to the foibles of a single individual like Tsar Paul or Maximilien de Robespierre. But Robespierre did not work alone, did he? Under him, you controlled the outworld of France. You were an accomplice to his republican depravities. I performed no acts of violence myself. A stunning defense! I just incited others to do the violence I proposed. My political views matched the views of those coming into power. The Jacobins. Yes, there was a synergy of viewpoints. An ethos was developing. I had been commissioned by the government to paint Horace defended by his father, and took to Rome. Only in Rome could I truly paint Romans. This was the result. Three sons pledging to their father to defend the state. The Republic of Rome. Yes, patriotism in defense of country became a revolutionary symbol of patriotism in defense of republicanism. Strong, steadfast, uncompromising. And yet I note the women in your painting, over there to the side. Hardly strong, steadfast, or uncompromising. Weak, slumping, silently acquiescent. The separate spheres of men and women as delineated by Rousseau, the public sphere of men, politics and war, the private sphere of women, household and family. And God forbid that a woman trespass into the business sphere of men. Ah, but there is no God, you say. Another legacy of the revolution. You wanted to create your own religion, mixing up Rousseau and your republican morality, then installing Robespierre as your high priest. Didn't catch on, did it? Ah, but the flame did catch on, didn't it? When at the grand feast of the Supreme Being, you passed the torch to Robespierre to incinerate a cardboard image that symbolized atheism, to reveal the image of wisdom underneath. You seem to be claiming that I have relegated both God and women to secondary status in the order of the world. In response, I offer the intervention of the Sabine women, painted soon after your entry into exile. Softer and smoother than one would expect, not so much of the muscularity and angularity in your earlier work, showing women bringing about peace, love prevailing over conflict, as we all foresaw the excesses of the revolution coming to an end. The excesses for which you yourself were all too culpable. In all human activity, the violent and transitory develops first. Peace and understanding appear only afterwards. I had a mirror installed on the wall opposite, so viewers could gain the sensation of being in the middle of it all. Oh, being in the middle of all that nakedness. Oh, and wasn't that flimsy style of dress, with the breasts exposed, an influence on the latest female fashions for a time? Not like the influence my Brutus had, with widespread imitations of its Roman furniture, and men and women adopting Roman hairstyles. But in this painting, you went for more of a Greek style. Years before, I myself had stimulated a brief trend in fashion to simulate the styles of ancient Greece. I had arranged a Greek-themed supper as a lark, an entertainment. It was a sensation, although all the costumes were just drapery I had in my studio for sittings. Soon the report spread in society that this supper had cost me 20,000 francs. When I traveled abroad, I found that this estimate had increased to 40,000 in Rome, 60,000 in Vienna, and 80,000 in St. Petersburg. In reality, I'd spent no more than 15 francs. Lies and rumors always surround those in the public eye. Well, luckily, your style of male fashions in this picture did not catch on. Oh, think of the colds to be caught wearing just a draped cape. Is this when people stopped calling you the Robespierre of the brush and started calling you the Raphael of the pantsless, les sans-culottes? I have heard that derogatory phrase, insolence. Or like the insolence that caused King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette to lose their heads. The Queen was well aware of her regal bearing, the way she would walk with her head erect, full of dignity. She remarked to me once, if I were not Queen, they would say I looked insolent, would they not? They did.
So the perceived insolence of a monarch saw king and god torn down and replaced by, yes, it's now Bonaparte, isn't it?
He is a great and mighty emperor.
Oh, a self-proclaimed emperor, just as of last December. Oh, you have been commissioned to commemorate the occasion with a painting, have you not?
Yes, still in its planning stages. I envision a vast array of onlookers in the nave of Notre Dame de Paris. I will draw the major participants from life.
Oh, even the Pope?
Of course, I painted his portrait just a few months ago. He'll be in a different pose in the final coronation painting.
Or didn't he sit with his hands in his lap at the ceremony, appearing at the coronation simply as a formality?
In my painting, he will appear in whatever pose Emperor Napoleon directs.
All spoken with the convictions of a true, uncompromising artist. And Bonaparte himself will be drawn from life,
He posed for me in 1797.
and hasn't aged a day since in the past 8 years, I'm sure.
Well, he's a busy man, and his viewpoint is that no one knows if portraits of great men are likenesses. It suffices that genius lives.
Or his genius, or yours. Oh, but I understand his point. When I first saw Bonaparte, I could hardly believe that his giant reputation was contained in the body of that tiny man. I felt the same way when first viewing Empress Catherine of Russia. Fame overshadows reality, I have found. That portrait reminds me of many I saw in my recent time in England, with just the heads finished, but exhibited nonetheless. Apparently, the persons who had posed were satisfied with just being seen and mentioned, and since half the price had been paid in advance, the painters were satisfied too.
In my experience, a portrait is left unfinished only when the sitter is too busy or is unreliable.
Well, other experiences may interfere. While in Russia, I was invited to paint the coronation scene of Tsar Alexander I and his consort Elizabeth.
Following the assassination of his father, Tsar Paul.
Yes, but I hadn't attended the coronation in Moscow, and my health left me unfit to work at a full-length picture. I was leaving Russia soon to take the waters at Carlsbad, so I did pastel portraits of the Tsar and Tsarina to enlarge at Dresden or Berlin.
True to life,
As always, perhaps on the flattering side.
I will strive for exact likenesses in my coronation painting. There are many surrounding Bonaparte willing to sit for me, and they'll all be included in the final painting.
Toadying for favor seems to have replaced your passion for fraternity, liberty, and equality.
That is unfair.
Or to you, to the world of art, or to the ideals of revolution you have abandoned.
In the arts, the way in which an idea is rendered and the manner in which it is expressed is much more important than the idea itself.
Or this from the man who vowed, I will never paint the portrait of a tyrant until his head lies before me on the scaffold.
Emperor Napoleon is no tyrant.
Not to you when he commissions painting after painting to enshrine himself in the pantheon of French heroes. His heroic crossing of the Alps, nearly swashbuckling, isn't he? Storm clouds above, wind swirling about. But wasn't his journey across the Alps actually accomplished in fine weather and on the back of a mule?
It's how the emperor wished to be portrayed.
Not yet the emperor, just a general in those days, but a painting showing a man aiming to rule the world, or at least all of Europe he can conquer.
I am happy to have been designated first painter by the emperor.
Well, he was obligated to you, was he not?
What do you mean?
For the Empress Josephine.
I don't follow.
You signed the death warrant for Alexandre de Beauharnais during the Reign of Terror,
He was a poor general-in-chief of the Rhine.
and the husband of a certain Josephine. She was suddenly free of wedlock, just 5 days before Robespierre himself was guillotined.
She did not know Napoleon Bonaparte at that time, nor did I. I hardly brought them together. But through a happy accident of fate, you made their union possible. The happy accident being the unnecessary murder of a loyal Frenchman. Oh, but he was a minor noble, wasn't he? Nothing more damnable than that during the Terror. Actions once taken cannot be reversed. Oh, the Emperor is not the only person your paintings have apotheosized. The death of Marat. Not from mythology, not from ancient history, painted soon after his death in 1793. The Pietà of the French Revolution, his turban an approximation of a halo, almost Christ-like. But Marat has had no resurrection. Jean-Paul Marat was a great man, fierce, uncompromising, an enemy of despotism, a champion of the common people, unafraid to attack conspirators against the revolution in his newspaper and pamphlets, a man of principle, a fine scientific mind, too, and a man with a chronic skin condition, consequently the bathtub fitted out with a writing desk. Killed by Charlotte Corday with a concealed knife after she fed him a spurious list of counter-revolutionaries. Ah, but he lived on in your portrait, and the grand funeral you planned for him only added to his status as a martyr to the cause of revolution. It was almost as grand as the funeral you arranged for Voltaire 13 years after his death. Voltaire was the father of the revolution, before the revolution even began. The father of the concepts that led to the revolution. He had been denied a church burial. Nearly 1 million people attended the procession as his remains were transported to Paris from the provinces. He deserved to be forever among the heroes of the Republic, interred in the Pantheon. Enshrined, where Marat was too. A little before scheduled for Marat, wasn't it, when his body began to putrefy, despite rouge and sprinkling with vinegar? When the atheistic times that followed, I hear that his bust replaced crucifixes in the churches of Paris. Thankfully, reason and Christianity have returned to France, and the portrait of Marat has been returned to me. Oh, not appropriate for public display at the current time. Today's fashion is Bonaparte. And under the Emperor, the nation grows better every day, don't you think? Or perhaps for men like you. I miss the urbanity, the graceful ease, the affability of manner, which was the charm of Parisian society before I left. The women reigned then. The revolution dethroned them. We did more than merely dethrone your queen. And Madame du Barry, mistress of Louis XV. Why should you have concerned yourself with her? Like many, she has requested that I make a portrait. The first was in 1781. Simple white dress, cascading hair, big hat, all elements we've seen before. The last I began in September of 1789. She sat for me in her chateau at Louveciennes, a lovely location, but with gunfire in the distance approaching, I hurried to Paris and left the portrait unfinished. Were you waiting for her return from England with the sumptuous diamond necklace Louis XV had commissioned for her before his death? Or the same necklace your sort accused Queen Marie Antoinette of bribing Cardinal de Rohan to obtain for her, baselessly accused. But Madame du Barry returned from England as the Terror still raged. Denounced by a servant she had just dismissed, she was arrested and sent to the guillotine. She was the only woman among all who perished in those dreadful days, unable to face the scaffold with firmness. She screamed, she begged, she shrieked with such despair that the mob was beginning to show her sympathy when the executioner hastened to finish his task. I am of the firm belief that the Terror was prolonged by the noble pride of dying with silent fortitude that was shown by so many of the victims. Had the victims behaved as Madame du Barry did, with heartfelt wails, the mob would soon have lost its taste for bloodshed. So the portrait has remained unfinished.
Yes, if someday it comes again into my possession, I hope to flesh out a full portrait of this graceful and strangely childlike woman.
We all try to reclaim what we have lost through death.
True, in the first instance, paternal love.
My father died when I was 9.
12.
I was sent to live with my uncles.
My mother remarried to a man so stingy he took to wearing my father's clothes without alteration and without a word of excuse. I found refuge in my drawing.
I found refuge in my drawing.
My father was an artist in pastels and gave me my first instruction.
My uncles were architects and sent me to get an education to follow in their footsteps. But
Drawing,
drawing was my passion.
was my passion.
I attended the Royal Academy, getting the best instruction possible in all genres of art: historical, portraiture, landscape, still life, and the human figure, both clothed and nude.
As a woman, I was forbidden from such anatomical studies and consequently from studying there. But I was already earning money painting portraits even before my mother remarried. And in 1783, I was finally admitted to the Royal Academy of Painting with my submission, Peace Bringing Back Abundance.
A rare allegorical subject for you. But wasn't another woman admitted that same year? That must have tarnished some of the glory for you.
Oh, she was admitted solely as a portrait painter. I wasn't saddled with that limitation.
But were you admitted as a history painter, the highest designation possible? No. And the name Lebrun. Charles Lebrun was director of the Academy a century back. That must have helped you gain entry.
I earned my place. You were elected to the Academy too. Your Andromache Morning Hector solidified your position in 1784, the year after I was admitted. A none too rare mythological subject for you, and yet you helped to have the Academy abolished during the Revolution, or still smarting from your repeated failures to win the Prix de Rome from them.
It had become too politicized, rigid, hierarchical, rife with nepotism and blatant favoritism, antithetical to the ideals of liberty and equality.
And yet it was reconstituted under a new name in 1795, just after you had fallen out of favor, and you joined immediately. So much for you reshaping the art world as well as society at large. So little has changed from monarchy to empire with just a little interregnum of fraternity, liberty, and equality, and terror.
The ideals of the revolution have not been forgotten.
The realities of the revolution have not been forgotten.
Art transcends both ideals and reality. A masterpiece needs to penetrate the soul and leave so deep an impression that it becomes more than real. An artist needs to understand the motives and nature of mankind, just as a philosopher does. Art needs to be useful, not just an ornament.
The public determines which artworks are worthy of appreciation.
And if a work is poorly conceived or poorly executed, the public will, by its indifference, let the artist know. Hard experience will teach him how to correct his mistakes, or her mistakes.
You know, Monsieur David, that the revisions of our work result mostly from the comments and suggestions of those commissioning our works, not from the public at large. Your glorification of Bonaparte at his request is one example, an example repeated in tiny revision after revision.
And those sitting for portraits are perhaps the most demanding.
No, those commissioning them. In Russia, I painted the granddaughters of Empress Catherine, garbed in Grecian tunics, their arms exposed. They loved it. Their father, the future Tsar Paul, loved it. But one of Catherine's favorites informed me she was scandalized by the amount of bare skin revealed, so I hurriedly replaced the tunics with long-sleeved dresses. Speaking to Catherine later, she assured me that she had made no such negative comments about the original portrait.
But she made negative comments about the finished portrait in a letter to a friend. Shall I quote? Madame Lebrun has these figures hunkered down before you on a settee, twists the neck of the younger one, makes them look like two naughty little girls, their hair done up like bacchantes with clusters of grapes, and dresses them in big red and violet tunics. In a word, not only is there no resemblance, but the two sisters are so disfigured that there are people who ask, which is the elder and which is the younger? Oh, how do you know such things? Well, the Empress had friends. I have friends. You make your living flattering those who sit for you, whether or not the flattery is richly deserved. Did it never occur to you that the comments you receive in person might be equally empty flattery?
Flattery from you I do not expect.
For you, pleasing the client is the highest calling. For me, to give tangible substance and a perfect form to one's thought, that, and only that, is to be an artist.
To be paid for producing an artwork, that is to be an artist. That and that alone. You can bind it round with the philosophical rigmarole all you like, but producing a canvas covered in paint and getting paid for it is all that counts.
That comment reflects truly low standards.
You work for money the same as I do. Yes, you may currently have the ear and the commissions of the Emperor and his hangers-on,
Just as you did in the court of Louis XVI.
but it's all in the service of finding a regular clientele. Word of mouth from those in power is an absolute boon to a career,
As you well know from lingering in the royal courts of Europe.
and we both have profited from being well connected.
And prolific.
Through so many portraits I have painted,
So many sketches I have made.
and paintings from them after.
When the design was perfect,
Our perfection is too high a standard
perhaps for you,
for any human being, although simply capturing a single moment on canvas sometimes approaches perfection.
for that moment, but I have a longer view in mind.
Styles change. What you consider the height of your artistic output will be seen as outdated and old-fashioned before long, probably already by some of your many pupils.
But I am guiding them toward the future.
You are acquainting them with the past. What they do with their future is their business, not yours. In days to come, you may wish to bask in their reflected glory, but I am perfectly content to know that my portraits have pleased many and recorded days and ways of life that are too quickly passing by. One of my latest, Lord Byron of England.
You have just returned from there, haven't you?
Yes, France was so changed when I returned in 1802 that I couldn't bear it for long. I had always wanted to visit England, so I've been there for the past couple of years.
The Treaty of Amiens was dissolved 2 years ago. All French visitors were to have been expelled.
Oh, the Prince of Wales interceded for me, and I was allowed to remain.
Of course, noblesse oblige. But I was of the impression that French painters were held in low esteem in England.
You're thinking of one particular essay quite abusive toward the modern French artists, but judging them based on works from 30 years ago, quite uninformed. Portions of it had been translated for me. Uh, I defended myself, and you, in a point-by-point rebuttal.
I can defend myself.
In English?
No.
I thought not, but I said many nice things about you.
Uh, did you like England otherwise?
Oh, a damp, foggy climate and socially somewhat austere for French tastes. London is as dismal as the climate, but overall an enjoyable sojourn.
You painted the nobility as you have wherever you visited. This Byron is just a boy.
Oh, yes, but charismatic, dabbling in poetry. Who knows? He may spark a revolution in literature that will sweep away the tastes of our present day.
We can only reflect our current times, the times we live in.
But times change.
But we must stay true to our art. It is a moral responsibility. Whims and fads have no place in our work.
Let those who follow us find their own way. We have found ours.
I see changes, great changes, coming as the French Empire reaches far beyond the borders of France, perhaps even into the Russia in which you spent so many years.
I intend to cross borders myself. Next into Switzerland, I think. I've heard the mountainous scenery there is entrancing.
Scenery and portraits of nobility, is that all you care about?
It's what I've known. I do not have the intellectual acuity you possess, nor the desire to force my viewpoints on the world. I'm happy to linger in the memories of all whom I've known. Marie Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette.
So many who sat for me reminded me of her.
She was one of a dozen or more, wasn't she? Children of Maria Theresa of Austria.
Or the youngest of 16. Her older sister, Maria Carolina, Queen of Naples and Sicily. Her niece, Maria Carolina's daughter and Empress of the Holy Roman Empire.
I see the resemblances, and I see your point that the bloodline of the Habsburgs is long and fruitful and will not die out.
Even though Marie Antoinette's life was cut short.
Justly.
Unjustly. You thought the revolution would be a sea change, washing away all the iniquities and inequities of society. You merely left them awash in blood that slowly has ebbed away.
We have seen changes, great changes in our lifetimes. More changes will follow.
And less those changes will concern us. We have found our way here to this moment in time. We will find our way beyond.
That we will, Madame Lebrun. That we will.